You've been told that clarity is about what you say, that if you just communicate more, people will finally understand. But that's not how communication actually works inside organizations, because messages don't move through companies like emails, they echo. And by the time that your message reaches the third layer of your business, it's already changed shape. And look, it's not that people aren't listening. It's that what they heard isn't what you meant. That gap between intent and impact is where trust erodes, execution slows, and your best strategies quietly die. Most leaders don't measure that gap. They just assume there's clarity whenever they speak. But the best leaders audit their clarity. They know how far their message traveled, how much meaning it lost, and how to fix it when the signal breaks down. I'm Ben Rosner, and for 15 years, I've helped leaders from the military, Fortune 500 companies, the United Nations, and fast growing startups uncover why their messages don't land and how to fix it quickly. This is part two of my 6-part mini series on the executive communication system, where I show you how to turn communication into a strategic advantage. And today we're going to measure clarity itself, and not by guessing, but by building a system that shows you exactly how well your messages travel. This is the Org Echo audit, and that is how to quantify clarity so you can lead with precision. So let's get right into it. With the Org Echo audit, we're really trying to figure out how well have messages actually landed. And part of that, to figure out how well they landed, it requires us to prove that clarity actually exists. So the question is, how do you even do that? What metric or system or model framework can we use to prove that out? Well, last week we discussed the Cascade system, and that is really, how do you make alignment automatic in your organization? So that is how messages travel throughout the organization. Today, through the Org Echo audit, we're going to talk about how to verify that alignment, how it actually took place, and to demonstrate both qualitatively and quantitatively that it took place. So that means for today, we're going to move away from designing communication, and today we're going to talk about how to diagnose it. So to be able to do that, we first need to understand what are the problems and what solution is required to be able to achieve this. So one of the first problems that you see uh, in today's companies is, first of all, leaders just assume that whenever they speak, there is automatic understanding and agreement. So I hear this over and over again. Ben, I don't get it. Like I told them what I want. I discussed and demonstrated what is required, but it seems that people just don't get it. And it's really it really comes down to this point where leaders just automatically assume I spoke, I thought it was clear. Clearly, it's other people that don't understand. And so this is one of the very first issues that pops up. The second problem that we have that adds on to the issues that we have today is that communication only flows down, and barely any leaders measure what echoes back up. So too often you have leaders that treat communication as a broadcast system. Like, I'm just going to broadcast what I think, what I need, what I want. But there's no mechanism by which they check, well, what is the response? Did this resonate with people? Did this move people? Has any one or any system captured that, so we know whether what the communication was actually worked? So that's the second problem we have. The third is that even the clearest messages can decay as they move through an organization. So you may recall that we talked about message distortion, which is, as whatever message you had at the very top in your boardroom, that might be really obvious, it might be really clear, but as it moves through the layers of the company, it starts to fray, it starts to decay, and it's not as clear as it once was. And so it's, first of all, important to understand that that is something that takes place, and also connects to the first issue, which is, just because a leader said something doesn't mean that it is perfectly understood all the way at the bottom of the organization. And the more complex the organization, the more opportunity there is for decay as the message flows down. And lastly, when you put all these things together, the biggest problem is that we ultimately have an illusion of clarity, meaning that, well, I spoke, I communicated, I thought it was clear. So, so clearly there is clarity. That's not the case. But when we think there is, the next thing we know, there's misalignment. And from that misalignment, we ultimately end up having what's called execution drift, which is where nothing that you actually wanted to happen ended up taking place. The linear progression is we have an illusion of clarity. So we think what we said, we think the intent we had is going to be executed, but because we weren't actually clear, there's misalignment. And the next thing you know, the execution drifts. It doesn't go into the direction you want. And the next thing you know, well, clearly my strategy isn't working. Clearly my idea is poor, but that's not actually the case. We so often confuse our poor communication with a bad idea or strategy. And so that's why so many companies change and shift and always ask, what should we be changing in terms of how we're thinking or how we're trying to achieve our goals? But sometimes it just comes down to communication. And these are the problems that are faced over and over again when it comes to that issue. So ultimately, what we need is a solution that does a few things. At the very base, we need a method by which we can measure, first of all, the comprehension of a message, meaning, did people even understand what it was that I communicated? Was it clear what my intent is, what my desire, what is the ultimate result? If we don't have basic level of comprehension, we don't have anything. So that's the first thing. Second, we need to make sure that there's consistency and measuring that, meaning, how do we know that what leadership is saying is echoed and is repeated by different mid-level managers, team managers, and also individual contributors? That consistency is what cements a message. Lastly, resonance, meaning, how can we measure how much people resonate with what it is that you said, how much it motivated them, how much they believe in what it is that uh, the message is and what the strategy is, meaning, do I understand what my part is in the larger vision? Do I understand how what I'm doing today ladders up for us achieving that? And do I believe that this is the best approach? When we have a system by which we can figure out all three of these things, that is one of the strongest solutions that we can put out there. And lastly, we need a system to identify the gaps between intent and impact so that we can fix them quickly. Now, the intent to impact gap we've talked about before as well, which is, what is the desire, what we want to happen, and what ultimately ends up happening. And so we need to figure out where these gaps are and how can we narrow it so that there is almost near frictionless middle between what we want to happen and what ends up happening. So that is the solution that we need to come up with, and that ultimately ends up being the org echo audit. So here is how communication flows through an organization and the echo that you can see throughout. So these little green circles that you see here, these are positive responses. So in a small Series A or in a small privately held company, it's very easy to have the right echo, the right response throughout the organization because it's pretty small. There's not a lot there. The hierarchy is typically very flat. Like most companies, get market share, get more people, get some basic level of brand recognition so that you can just establish yourself against all these competitors. And so getting information to flow top to bottom, not very hard. And so you therefore see a very narrow intent to impact gap. And because of the flat hierarchy, you have less message decay, you have faster decision making because people know what they need to do. Okay, I really need to get to our ideal customer. It's this very, very specific, very unique avatar. So I in marketing know I need to speak to these individuals. So because they know what they need to do, they know what the strategy is, they know how to go from point A to point B really quick. Next thing you know, fast results. Fantastic. But this also assumes that there's a lot of clarity in the vision, the mission, the strategy, all that good stuff. The issue is when we try to replicate and say, well, what worked at the smaller level is going to work at a bigger organization or as we scale. That's where things start to fray. So going from, let's say, large seed or small Series A and progressing to a mid-sized firm. So we're talking B2C in the startup land or a mid-size in a privately held. You start to see structures much closer to this, where you have not only the leadership team at the top here, but you also have customer success and you have sales and you have engineering and marketing and so on and so forth. You have significantly more layers that you're now building in between the leadership team all the way down to the individual contributors. So there are a lot of places by which the message phrase along the way where people do not understand what it is that you want to do as clearly as when you were in a smaller company. And that could take a lot of different forms. For example, if a CEO wants to have a specific focus for that quarter, and that is to really buff and bolster up the customer success features of the company so that it is super easy to communicate. It is super easy to put in tickets. It is super easy to provide feedback and complaints. That's really important for the leadership team because that is one of the ways by which they can differentiate in the market. Well, that message might be really clear up here, but you could have different places in the organization where it's not so clear. For example, if in engineering, the understanding was, okay, well, we need to have a system to get feedback. Well, maybe the head of engineering didn't get the memo, or they understood it to be a specific feature that's required, but maybe that's not the right feature that needs to be created. If that's the case, they're communicating an incorrect focus to their team, and that team then continues to provide that wrong focus to the individual contributors at this level. And if that's the case, no wonder you're going to start to have execution drift, meaning we know this what the strategy is at the top, but now very slowly, different parts of the organization are not executing where I want them to. So that's just engineering. But maybe the the head of customer success, he or she did a really good job understanding, but somebody else on the mid-level manager doesn't get it, and they continue to communicate it down to their people, and so on and so forth. And so if there's no mechanism to first of all ensure that there's an understanding from the senior leadership team down to the senior leadership layer or the mid-level layer, and as we go down, that's a problem. And it gets even worse if there's no way for us to figure out how well does it resonate at the different levels. So this kind of structure, these kind of issues, as they progress throughout the whole company, this is something that increases or expands the intent to impact gap, especially if you have multiple departments and multiple heads or multiple individual contributors that are not working exclusively and specifically to be able to achieve the goals of management. And so, if the vision and strategy is less clear throughout the organization, there is less clarity. And if there's less clarity, there's problematic execution. If we have problematic execution, strategy is not achieved. That's a huge issue. And so it's important to understand, how do we even think about the impact, the intent to impact gap? What creates it? How do we even think about what clarity even means? And so from where I sit, there's a very specific way to look at clarity. Now, there's intent, the message itself, interpretation, and impact. All of these have to work in tandem. All of these have to work together in order to achieve true clarity. And that's why there's a latter portion to this. The intent is, first of all, what is the desired outcome that you have? What is it that you want to achieve? And what is it that you want your audience to understand? This has to be crystal clear in the beginning. If we cannot explain with crystal clear understanding, why are we doing something? What is the purpose? And what kind of result we want? There will not be any type of proper execution on strategy. We will not be able to achieve that whatsoever. Once we have a really clear understanding of what we want to communicate, the second part that comes in is the message. And we need to think about more specifically, what did you say or what are you saying? And this is where words and tone matter so much, because if I say we need to be really efficient, I want more efficiency at the company, I might mean I'm putting more resources towards helping different team members achieve goals. But a mid-level manager might think of it, oh man, he means that we actually need to cut jobs. That's how we become more efficient. We have just fewer people and we're going faster. That's not the case. And so we need to think about the words that we use, how they resonate with people, and then obviously what tone we use so that we can communicate in the right emotional way. From there, we need to think about, what did they hear? What did they repeat back? Again, the disconnect between the words we might say and the tone we use versus what is understood by others and what is repeated back. So this is where you could have that confusion about what efficiency means. And lastly, what did they do? This is probably the most important part, which is, what are the observable actions that you've seen as a result of the communication you had? And so you literally just look at the impact that's taken place. Here's my strategy. here's what I want to achieve, here's what I expect from everybody. And now we look and we can look at individuals, we can look at departments, we can look at the company as a whole. What was the impact? And so the better we are at understanding how intent, message, interpretation, and impact all work together, that is what's going to allow us to achieve true clarity. And that is what is going to allow us to narrow this intent to impact gap. So it becomes as small as possible. And we have as frictionless a situation as possible from the minute we say something to the minute something takes place. So I just wanted to go over that. And that's what I mean by clarity and how I think about even communicating in the first place, so that whatever you want from a strategic point of view ends up taking place. These are the components that are required. So if that's the case, what should we be on the lookout for? What are some of the negative communication signals or echo signals that we might experience if we're not being as clear as possible? So this is just another way of asking, like, how cleanly did the message return? So there are 4 negative echo signals: noise, distortion, delay, and silence. The first, noise, the way that might present itself is really as confusion. And so confusion or contradiction. You might hear people saying, you know what, I'm not so sure. I think you meant this. And that's a really big problem, because it ultimately means that your message was not understood in the least. That's what noise creates. For distortion, when we look at this portion here, it really, the kind of feedback you would have, that echo, is that whatever you say would be reworded, but with the wrong emphasis. So I might say, oh, so you might hear, oh, yeah, I think what was told to us is that we need to be more efficient. So we need to uh, hire more people, right? So rather than provide more resources. So it's reworded, but with the wrong emphasis. And that really means that we have a misalignment as it relates to the meaning of what it is that we wanted to communicate. So there's an issue in the clarity ladder there. Then we have delay, which is an actual understanding of what you wanted to communicate. But the issue is that nobody acted yet. It didn't trigger some type of behavioral change. So you might hear someone say, "Oh yeah, yeah, with efficiency, uh, what it means is that we want to be able to provide more tools or training um, for people, but I don't know what tools to get, or I don't know what training I need to provide." And so we heard what was said, but we just haven't acted on it. And so ultimately, we did not trigger the right behaviors. And lastly, and this is the worst one, it's silence. Now, with silence, there's no echo whatsoever. It means that ultimately there was no psychological safety, or there is a disengagement at the company. So think about an all hands you've been in, where any one of the leadership team speaks, and instead of hearing responses when someone would ask, well, any questions, anything I can answer, complete silence. And so we might think, oh, well, that's tacit agreement. But later on in private Zooms and one on one conversations, maybe in the hallways, people have confusion, or they're skeptical about what took place or what was said. Meaning, I know what the head of customer success wants us to do, but I don't know if that's actually what's going to drive us towards our goals. So these are the kinds of negative signals that we might experience when we actually listen and hear for what different people in the company are actually responding with. And so we need to figure out a way by which we take qualitative insights and transform them to quantitative metrics. And that's the next portion. So here's how we take things we hear from a qualitative point of view and change them into quantitative insights. There are a few portions here. The score goes from 1 to 5. And the labels that we give each of the things that we hear from an echo perspective is silence or static, distortion, delay, clean signal, and amplified signal. And the way to think about it is that 1 is the absolute worst. It is the least clear. And then as we go down and go up rather, and get all the way to 5, they become significantly more clear. So this is, actually it's red, least God, I should have been doctor with this handwriting. That is least clear, and this is most clear. So let's go one by one here and discuss what these things look like, how we label them, and then how we should understand what this means. So first of all, if you have a score of 1, which is the worst, you get silence or static. Now, what it really means is that there's no recognition, or what you hear back, it's completely inaccurate. So an example that you might hear if you're doing these interviews, because that's a really big part of it, which I'll go to shortly when we go through the process itself. But when we do these interviews and we sample from different people, some of the responses that you might hear are, "Well, I haven't heard about that," or "I'm not sure what that means at all." So complete disengagement, silence, or static. And what it really means, the way we should be interpreting that kind of a response, is that the communication completely failed to land, and the message that was provided was absent, or was completely irrelevant because it didn't move anybody, and it created a complete as big of a gap as you can between your intent and your desired outcome. So there's nothing worse than silence. Some people think, well, hearing something incorrect is worse. It's completely worse when you hear nothing, or you have complete disengagement because people are scared to speak up, because they're disconnected, because they don't feel like there's anything worth their time to engage with. The second layer, or the second number here, is distortion. And distortion means that there is some awareness, but there's a wrong meaning to what was understood, or it is misapplied. So an example response could be, "Oh yeah, that efficiency thing, that was like us hiring more people, right?" When it was really about an efficiency of resources, not people. So the way we should be interpreting this is that there's partial comprehension, but ultimately misalignment is high because of it. And so we ultimately need to be able to be in a position where we reframe the message so that it becomes a lot clearer, and you don't have this distortion of what you actually meant. The next part is delay, which is where we're getting a little bit more clear with what it is that we are communicating, but there's still an issue, right? So the core idea is understood, so that's great, but people ultimately lack the confidence or the clarity in direction to take the actions that they need. So, I think it's about improving client trust, but I'm not sure exactly what I should be doing. So I hear you. We need to earn client trust more. That's going to help us achieve our strategy for the quarter. But as a manager or an individual contributor, I don't really know what to do with that. I don't understand the specific actions that I have to take. And so what's good is that the message landed cognitively. Fantastic. They understood it, but the people lack conviction or specificity of the steps they need to take. And so that's not helpful. But we're on the right track. Then we get to our first proper layer of clarity, which is having a clean signal. In this situation, your message is both understood and it's repeated accurately. And so what you might see is someone repeating back or saying, "Oh yeah, we're focused on reducing complexity so clients experience speed." Great, that's exactly what we want. We want there to be less complexity and more speed on the side of the clients. Now, this means that the message comprehension is solid, but we might need minor refinements throughout different portions of the message so that it also triggers behavior, because that's the last part here. That's what brings it all together. To have an amplified signal where you're not just sending it out, but it comes back in an amplified way towards you. When we see that come in real life, that means the message is internalized, and it is emotionally resonant. So people can emotionally resonate with it. And it means that they understand what is their part that they need to do that ladders up to the greater strategy and to the greater vision. And as importantly, linked to behavior, because that's what we really want. So what you might hear from people is, "Oh yeah, everything we're doing this quarter ladders up to making clients feel simplicity and frictionless in our process." And I use that in my last meeting. So they understand what we're trying to do strategically. They understand what they need to do vis-a-vis them and the client. And then lastly, here's the behavior I took as a result of this message being communicated to me. And so in this situation, it doesn't get any better. The message is fully adopted and it's echoed behaviorally. That's when we're just crushing it, when we're absolutely solid. So this is the way we want to think about examples that we hear from people and how we can put numbers against it to really try to understand what is the quality of the echo. How clear have our messages been? How can we start proving out this clarity? So that's what that looks like. So when we put this all together, we end up getting the org echo audit, which is a 4-step process to figure out exactly that. So let me walk you through the 4 steps. The first part is to sample. And by sampling, we need to gain or create a bunch of different groups of people that we pull together and we interview them. So after any type of new initiative or transformation or major announcement, whenever that is rolled out, select a sample group across functions and groups. So some from marketing, some from CS, engineering, etc. And we want to be able to ask them a set of key questions to better inform you of their understanding of whatever it is you've communicated. So we want to make sure that these questions are consistent across all the groups and people that we ask. And this isn't comprehensive, but some of the types of questions that you would want to ask are, in your own words, what's the main message leadership shared last week about whatever topic? What are you thinking, or how are you thinking differently about this now? And really importantly, what are you doing differently because of it? And what we want to do is really capture these answers verbatim, because there's going to be nuance between the way people communicate. And so typically what I like to do to be able to capture things verbatim is to use a recording software like Fathom, which has been fantastic at crystallizing ideas, perfect transcripts, and I can just focus on the interview itself. And if you're thinking, well, Ben, how many people should I sample? I got you. So this is not a scientific measurement by any style or by any means, but this is a way to think about what are the minimum number of people that I really need to speak to so that I can get really good qualitative and quantitative results. So if you are under 50 employees, you want to talk to at least 7 to 10 people. At 50 to 200, between 10 and 25 at least. 200 to 1,000, 20 to 60, and 1,000 to 5,000, about 30 to 100. These are, again, rough estimates, but this is the minimum that we would really want to hit to be able to get good metrics. Then the second part is to listen. And now we need to be able to read and listen for accuracy, confidence, emotional tone, and linkage to action in the responses we get. And what's really important is to note which of the negative types of signals that we are hearing over and over again. Is there noise? Is there distortion? Is there delay? Is there silence? So that we can accurately provide numbers. And we also want to be able to capture which parts resonate the most. So from the message, what did you really connect with? What do you believe? How do you see what you do ladder up to that bigger vision? This is going to allow us to understand what's working in the message and what's not working in the message. And from there, we want to be able to assign that 1 to 5 score from before. From here, we then go to step 3, which is understanding the echo index, so the number where it falls in between the spectrum that we agreed on before. And what does that mean? And from there, how to respond. So we'll go one by one here. For anything that's 1 to 1.4, so again, like the lowest level that we had, like the worst, the silence, the static, all of that awful stuff, quite frankly, if we are in this negative situation, we need to be able to rebuild. And to rebuild, it means we're essentially starting from scratch here. We have to reset communication entirely, okay? We're going back to first principles. We need to clarify the why. We need to rework the core narrative of the purpose of what it is that we're trying to do. And we need to restart the cascade of information that we're flowing through the company. And we need to also involve managers at all levels in framing this new change and in framing the purpose and ultimately helping them with the delivery. Because if we get to that one, there's no engagement, people don't understand, there's no resonance, you've got to start from scratch here, essentially. If we are at 1.5 to 2.4, it's ultimately a situation with high distortion in terms of the echo that we get back. We need to reframe. Now, in order to reframe, we need to not restart the communication from scratch, but we need to rebuild the message from scratch. So clarify, what is the intent? What are we trying to achieve? And we need to replace anything that is vague or emotionally charged words with really concrete and purpose driven language. And we need to provide examples. So, what this is and what this isn't. So that's the reframe if we are anywhere from a 1.5 to a 2.4. If we're at 2.5 to 3.4, we're starting to get some minimal clarity. Okay. There's still ways to go, but we've got some minimal clarity here. If that's the case, we want to refocus everyone. We want to be able to specifically demonstrate with examples. We want to simplify what it is that we're saying so it's a little bit more clear because people get it, but not completely. And we need to be able to repeat, repeat, repeat. Okay. Messages that are repeated are messages that are understood and ones that resonate. And we ultimately need to make it operational. So you have to assign ownership, add urgency, define next steps, link to visible outcomes, and use micro deadlines and behavioral cues. I need this done by Friday, and here's what that needs to look like from an action perspective from your side. That way, we can start moving things much faster. Now, if we get to 3.5 to 4.4, now we're getting some pretty decent alignment. Okay. And if we're in a situation where we have those numbers for the majority of the sample that we're speaking with on average, what we want to do is maintain this rhythm. Don't change too much, but keep going over and over again. We want to be able to repeat this and we want to audit for consistency. So, how close is this consistent message being echoed across the different companies? And we want to be able to think about, how do I simplify this even further? How can I be even more clear in what I'm saying so that we can get to that last level of the highest form of clarity? But in this situation, we want to be able to lock down key phrasing that we know works into assets. So if I know that efficiency is something that's actually really well understood and everyone gets it, I want to start using that in the messaging and the phrasing in frequently asked question documents, in all the decks that I use for presentation, in the cadences, so the all hands meetings, the um, top of the week meetings on Mondays, the end of the week meetings where I try and get feedback. I want to lock in these phrases that if I'm the leadership team, I'm using it. If I'm a mid-level manager, I'm using them. Or this is the language that we now use because it's working. And so now it's just continuing with that rhythm. Lastly, if we're anywhere from a 4.4 to a 4.5 to a 5, now we've got fully embedded clarity. It doesn't get much better than this. At that point, we want to reinforce. So the important thing is to institutionalize this. So highlight examples in all hands of someone who's done a really great job because they understood the message, it's linked to behavior, we got an outcome that we want. We want to start to weave the messaging into onboarding because clearly it works so well with our current staff. Anyone that comes in as we grow, they need to understand at the exact same level. And because it's understood so well, should absolutely use it for onboarding. And we need to codify it in any type of cultural documentation, how we act, how we think, the values that we had. This is the stuff that clearly resonates with so much of the company. It is so clear. That is what we have to go with. We have to put into all of our assets like we talked about before. And it has to become key phrasing in the company. And when you put all of that together, when we understand how to sample, when we understand the purpose of echoing in the company in the first place, where messages can decay, where it's not a broadcast system, we need to listen for people to communicate back. When we understand what kind of messages and interpretations we need to listen for when we do this audit, and we want to listen to see how clear we were, when we're able to take qualitative phrases and put some quantitative metrics against it, and when we're able to understand exactly how we then fix the issues as they arise, that is the way that we can go from the illusion of clarity to having crystal clear clarity and moving the company forward to all the desired actions that you want, from efficiency to growth and scaling and ROI, whatever it is that you want. All of that is on the other side of just ensuring that we have the most crystal clear communication across the entire company. So that's the org echo audit. That's how all this stuff comes together. It's what I've used consistently with clients that I've had in different parts of my life over 15 years in corporate and government and military, over and over again, to really ensure that whatever I communicate, whatever the leaders I work alongside communicate, this is what they use. I hope you found this valuable. If you have, I don't know what you're waiting for. Just slap that subscribe button, hit the like one while you're at it. For next time, the way we go and continue from here, it's okay, well, now I understand how to cascade messages. I understand how to check if those messages were effective. And the next thing is how to build a narrative. And not just any narrative, but a narrative where you have people who are willing to run through walls for you, and where when you communicate that to the market, they understand that you are the only choice for them. I'm going to put that video right around here so you can follow along and you can be part of that as well. And if this is something that you want to fix today, you can really just message me on Instagram, the number 313, or you can reach out to me on DM on LinkedIn, and I can be your comms partner, and we can make all these troubles go away so you can achieve the outcomes that you want for your business tomorrow. And until next time, keep leading with clarity.